This time we're going to talk about plot. And the way I create my plots is there's nothing too unusual about it. I just start with an idea for a story and sort of build events out from there into something that will be dramatic and interesting. Um, in the case of Dragon Girl, my graphic novel, I thought, well, I would like to do something about dragons because those are popular and kids like dragons. And also, I thought they'd be fun to draw, but I didn't want to do just the regular knight slays an evil dragon thing. So I had this notion of a girl who comes across this cave of dragons, dragon eggs actually, and as they hatch, she wants to start taking care of the babies. And it eventually became this notion of her having this sort of dragon farm where she raised dragons like livestock. It evolved from there with the help of my agent and also my editor, who was interested in the book, into something very different and much more elaborate. So with advice from them, they sort of molded the direction of the thing into something that became a very straight up sort of adventure story. The key to plotting for me is a tip that I heard from the guys that created South Park, actually. They talk about the writing process, and when they talk about what they do when they're writing, the key word in that process for them is therefore, which means that every event that you're showing in your story or describing or depicting in their case, because they make films, what happens after that shouldn't just be something that tacked on. Whatever happens after one event is caused by that first event. It's a very, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Cause and effect relationship. So, in other words, if you go through your plot, you should be able to put the word therefore logically between each of the events. So, in other words, a little girl goes for a walk through the woods and she comes across a cave full of dragon eggs, and as they hatch, she sees babies. Therefore, she decides to start taking care of them and sort of act as their mother. Therefore, she has to find a way to do that without sort of making them too used to being human. So she dresses herself as a dragon. One of them gets a little bit too close to her and starts to think of her as its actual mother and starts to follow her everywhere. And she can't leave it all by itself, but therefore, she's got to take it home with her, and her brother, who is very suspicious of dragons and hates them, therefore, there's a lot of conflict at home. So you see how each of the things that happens in the plot is a logical extension, is the next logical step in the process of telling the story that's all based on what came before. Pixar Studios is really great at constructing their plots, and you can get a lot of really useful and interesting advice from the things that you find online about how Pixar does that. This is an example on screen here of something I found online. You should look for it, Pixar's 22 Rules of Storytelling. There's a short little sentence or two about the things that Pixar looks for in a plot and what they build into a plot to make it very involving and interesting, and to make their characters come to life, and to make you care about what's happening in the story. So take a look for that online. I think you'll find those tips very interesting. Now, given that, let's talk a little bit more specifically about doing plotting and pacing in comics. These next few bits are from Scott McCloud's book, Understanding Comics, and they really work well to explain the choices that a comic book storyteller has to make to tell an enticing story. So you can see here, this is the simplest version of a tale about someone who goes out and drinks while he drives and is killed. It's all told in the course of really just 4 panels. Here's McCloud's variation on that very same story, with a little more detail thrown in to show you how this character's night went, other than just the fact that he went out and drove and drank and then got into a car crash. And you can see that what McCloud has added here gives a little more human element to the story than just those simple 4 panels that we began with. Then we get the last variation on Scott McCloud's story about the car crash that has lots and lots of detail. Everything from all the places that the character went to that evening and all the people that he met, even to the point of showing him getting in his car, slamming the door, sitting in it for a minute, and then turning the engine over. So we get right into the minutia of how how that evening went, even down to the point where it's almost a second by second discussion or depiction of what happened that evening. These three variations on the same tale give you some idea of the kind of choices that a comic storyteller has to go through. He has to decide, one of his most important decisions is what to leave in and what to leave out, along with how to show what he's going to end up depicting. Let me elaborate a little bit on that last part, the idea of what to show in a comic scene to tell the story that you want to tell. So here we've got the illustration, the sequence of the character climbing into his car and sitting there for a few moments, starting it up and then driving off. There's a lot of different choices that a comic illustrator could make about how to depict that scene. Here, McCloud shows the scene in a very distant, staccato sort of a sequence where the car looks the same in each panel, and you sort of get a sense of almost like a film camera set on this sort of stagnant scene, and you get a staccato sort of a rhythm to everything that happens in there. But there are other ways to have done it. And for instance, let's say that we show a close-up of the car and the character opening his car door. Let's say the next shot is of him inserting the keys into the ignition. Maybe the next one is a close-up of his hand turning the keys in the ignition. The next shot could be a shot of the hood starting to rumble with some noise effects that show that the car's turning over. Then the next the panel could be, say, a close-up of a tire, and it's sort of screeching on the pavement, and a little cloud of dust is coming out behind it. And then a shot of the car going off into the distance, sort of riding off into the sunset. That sequence that I just described tells the same story as McCloud's set of few panels here, but it tells it in a different way, and maybe a more dramatic way, but maybe one that's not as appropriate for the story. Maybe there's a point to how static and staccato McCloud's depiction of it is that fits the story that you're trying to tell better. And so it shows you the variations that are available to you in terms of how to tell any given moment in a story. These decisions about what to leave in and what to leave out of your story, and how to show the scene, what sort of camera angles to pick, whether it's a close-up or a distant shot or whatever, that's the real mechanics, the real nuts and bolts of telling a story in graphic novel format. To give you an idea of how I make the sort of decisions we've just been discussing when I create graphic novels and comics, we're going to use the example of my graphic novel Dragon Girl. So let's start the discussion from the point where I already have a plot all laid out. I know what the story is going to be from beginning to middle to end, and now it's time to start making decisions about how to tell that story in pictures and panels and with word balloons. The first part of that process is to do thumbnail sketches. And this is the stage at which you do small sketches of each page of the story. And I do mean each page. In the case of Dragon Girl, that meant the first step was to do 190-some pages of thumbnail sketches to plan out the whole story in this sort of chicken scratch form. And the reason I do that is because I don't want to spend a lot of time drawing at this point and being careful about the details of what characters look like and things like that. This is the point at which I'm making decisions about how to pace the story, how long all the scenes are or short they may be, and how many pages or how many panels go on a page, and how those panels get arranged. You know, what are the most dramatic moments? How much real estate on a page does that take up? Some panels are going to be smaller than others, some larger than others, theoretically based on how important and dramatic any given moment is. That's what the thumbnail stage is for, planning the whole story out so that you know how it flows, and also so that you know that you're hitting the right page count. Because in comics, unlike in just prose, you can't just write until you're finished. Generally speaking, you have to hit a very specific page count, and you don't want to find out that you've left too much room at the end of the book or not enough room at the end of the book to tell the story and pace it the way you need to tell a dramatic story. So all of these things are solved by a careful process of thumbnailing out your story so that you know how it's going to lay out. Here's a closer look at my thumbnail sketches for page 31 and 32 of the book, and you'll see that they're not carefully drawn at all. There's only enough information there to tell me what my plan is so that I know when I go to the large pages to start drawing that I know what I had in mind to tell that story at that particular spot. Now, with all 192 pages of thumbnail sketches done, it's time to start working on the actual artwork for the story. And that's what you're seeing here. This is the pencil stage, and these pages are actually drawn about 1.5 times the size of the printed page so that I can get in enough detail, and then when it shrinks down, all the artwork looks nice and crisp. But you can see the drawing is a lot more careful now. It's not complete, but at least this is where I'm concerned about making sure my anatomy is correct and all my perspective is believable, and I don't have to think too much about the storytelling at this point because I've worked all that out in my thumbnail sketches, which only took a few minutes apiece. Now that I'm spending hours on a page, I know that the storytelling is sound, and that's where I can start concentrating on the actual drawing and the quality of the drawing and the scenes that I'm depicting. I'm still thinking about storytelling because I'm still thinking about specific facial expressions on characters to help get their emotion across, but the bulk of the storytelling process has been done in the thumbnail stage. You may also notice that the word balloons have now appeared too. I worked a little bit differently than most people. Because I'm an author-illustrator, I actually let the pictures drive the story and the pacing of the story, and then add the word balloons to go with the images that I've created. So I don't have a script when I'm drawing the story. I write the script as the pages are being drawn. That way I know that I don't overwrite. I have a tendency to write too much dialogue that takes up too much room on the page if I try a script first, and I find that letting the visuals tell the story and then letting the dialogue balloons sort of enhance it a little bit, that's the process that works best for me. After that, the next stage is to just carefully finish off the artwork with pen and ink and brush, and that's what you're seeing here. All the pencils that I did are now much more carefully drawn, much more precisely drawn in pen and ink and brush and ink, and the gray tones that you see are added in the computer, and this is the finished form of what the pages look like in the book. The storytelling has all been taken care of at this stage. Now I just have to draw the pages well. And as you might expect, this is the most time-consuming part of the process, at least on a per-page basis. The penciling stage takes maybe a couple of hours. The thumbnail stage for each page takes just a few minutes. But the inking and finishing stage is going to take 6 or so hours at least. So that's the process for creating a comics page. Now all you have to do is do that 192 times and you'll have a graphic novel. Now it's time to try out these skills on your own. What I want you to do is take a scene, whether it's one that you've written or whether it's from a book or a movie that you remember seeing, and to take that scene and to do thumbnail sketches of it. Plan out the pages to try and tell that scene in a way that you're satisfied with. So you're going to be making decisions about how many panels go on a page, how many pages the scene runs across, and what's depicted in each panel, whether it's a close-up or whether it's a distant shot, what angle you might be viewing things from, whether it's high or low or medium. All of those things are the decisions that go into telling a story in comics format, and that's what the thumbnail sketches are created for. If you're really ambitious, you can do thumbnails of 2 different sequences of the same scene and figure out two different ways of staging it and see which one you like the best.